Hello everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here at SAIDS 2025. Today I will present our scoping review titled Level Up with a Story, a scoping review on narrative in serious game for children and adolescents health. This work was conducted by Jiawei Dai and Professor Kenny Cho from Hong Kong Baptist University. Here is the agenda. Let's start with some background. Serious games are digital games designed with a primary purpose beyond entertainment, such as education or health promotion. Within these games, narrative elements has been identified as a key driver for creating immersive experience, fostering emotional connections, and motivating users by providing a meaningful context for gameplay. And here are two examples. For children and adolescents who are in a critical period for forming lifelong health habits, serious games are particularly promising. This generation is highly familiar and comfortable with digital technologies, making games an engaging medium for health intervention. Despite the growing use of narratives, existing research remains fragmented. Previous studies have explored the general effectiveness of serious games and have looked at various narrative genres and structures in isolation. However, a systematic understanding is still lacking. We don't know how a clear map of how these narrative features are commonly implemented and how they are interactive with the common game mechanics and how the interactions automatically influence young users' engagement, motivation, and health behaviors. To address this gap, we formulate three specific research questions. First, what narrative features are commonly employed in this serious game? Second, what patterns exist in how game mechanics can occur or interact with narrative structure? And finally, how do these narrative features influence the emotional engagement, motivation, and health behavior? To answer these questions, we adopt a scoping review methodology, following the established 5-step framework by Axie and O'Malley. We also used the Prisma SCR extension to ensure a transparent process. The stages were identifying our research questions, searching for related studies, selecting the studies, charting the data, and finally collecting and summarizing the results. Our research strategy was built around 5 core concepts: serious games, children and adolescents, narration, health, and method. We developed comprehensive Boolean search string for each category, as shown in this table. These strategies were executed across 4 major databases: Web of Science, Scopes, PubMed, and the ACM Digital Library, finding an initial 3,917 records. The study selection process followed the Prisma flow. After removing duplicates, we screened titles and abstracts against our inclusive and exclusive criteria. The key criteria were: the game must target children or adolescents, involve a health topic, include narrative elements, and be an empirical study, and report clear outcomes on engagement or behavior. After a full text review on the most related papers, we arrived at a final dataset of 18 studies for in-depth analysis. Here is a list of 18 studies included in our review, spanning publication from 2015 to 2025. They cover a diverse range of health topics, including mental health, physical activities, social skills for ASD, and disease prevention. For each of the 18 studies, we systematically charted data across several dimensions. This includes basic information like authors and topic, detailed narrative features such as genre, plot structure, and modality, the core and immersive game mechanics, the evidence generation approach, meaning the study design and measurement methods, and finally, the reported outcomes. The table provides a snippet of our data extractions. For example, the study focused on HPV vaccination promotion for adolescents. It used a fantasy genre with a quest plot, delivered through a linear narrative with limited branching. The core mechanics were chosen-based decision-making and quizzes, supported by immersive elements like visual imagery and dialogue. The study design was a pilot with a randomized experiment, and the key outcome was a high level of emotional engagement, with adolescents finding the game immersive and engaging. These structured extractions allowed for consistent cross-study comparison. Now let's move to our findings. For research question 1, on common narrative features, we found that realistic genres was the most prevalent. These games situate health topics in familiar contexts like school or daily life. Fantasy genres were also very popular, providing imagination context to engage younger players. In terms of plot, we see a mix of author-driven archetypes like the quest or overcoming the monster, and user-driven immersed narrative that allows for personalization. Most games feature linear structure, though some used branching or episodic formats to increase player agency. Common character archetypes include heroes, mentors, and villains, aligning well with pedagogical goals. A conceptual contribution was our typology of narrative modalities. We distinguished between how a narrative is delivered, such as through verbal text, visual symbolic cutscene, and a multimodal combination, and how it is structured, whether it's script, participatory with branching cues, symbolic projective, or even AI-generated. We found that verbal and visual symbolic narratives were the most common. However, more specific modality like symbolic projective, where players use symbols to express personal experience, or AI-generated narrative were typically used in target scenarios, such as therapeutic contexts. Many games successfully integrate multiple modalities to deeply immersive. Addressing research question 2, we identify clear patterns in how narrative and mechanics interact. This heat map visualizes the co-occurrence frequency between narrative genres and game mechanics across the 18 studies. The color intensity shows how often certain pairs appeared. Our confounding was that fantasy narrative were frequently paired with chosen-driven mechanics and role-playing. This combination fosters a sense of agency and immersion as players choose directly influence the story. In contrast, realistic narratives were more common associated with simulation and scenario-based mechanics. Here, the focus is less on changing the story and more on rehearsing appropriate behavior or experimenting consequences in a controlled real-life environment. For research question 3, we coded the strength of evidence on a 3-level scale. We found that emotional engagement was the most consistently reported outcome, though often based on interactive or anecdotal evidence, which we coded as level 2. Motivation and knowledge gain were also common, but they were often short-term. Importantly, sustained behavior change was rarely reported and typically under-evaluated. We also observed a development nuance. Younger players respond stronger to fantasy and symbolic narratives, while older adolescents sometimes show reduced effects if they have prior health knowledge, suggesting a need to tailor narrative complexity to the age group. Here is a table of the summary of brief descriptions, includes narrative types, game mechanics, and player outcomes for each literature in the database. To synthesize all these relationships, we developed the narrative mechanic outcome matrix, visualized here as a Sankey diagram. This is a core contribution of our work. It maps the connection between narrative genres on the left, game mechanics in the center, and player outcome on the right. The width of each flow represents the frequency of occurrence in our dataset. For instance, you can see a thick flow from fantasy to role-playing, and then to emotional engagement, highlighting a prevalent and effective design pattern. Conversely, you can also identify unexplored opportunity. For example, choice-making is rarely paired with science fiction narrative. So this matrix is not just a descriptive summary, it's a generated design tool. It helps researchers and designers see what combinations are common, what works, and where there might be promising gaps in the design space. In summary of our main contributions, conceptually, we introduced a detailed typology of narrative modalities, providing a richer vocabulary for analyzing stories in serious game. Particularly, we offer the narrative mechanic outcome matrix as a design-facing tool to help developers position and reflect on their design strategies within an evidence-infused context. Empirically, we identified a clear disparity in the literature. While games are good at fostering short-term engagement, evidence for long-term behavior change is still scarce. Of course, our study has limitations. We were restricted to English language publications, and many of the reviewed studies themselves had small sample size, short-term follow-up, and are realized on self-reported data. This limitation directly points to future research directions. There is a strong need for longitudinal study to track sustained behavior impact. Cross-cultural comparisons would help us understand how narrative resonate across different populations. Finally, exploring emerging technologies like VR or VR present a promising avenue to enhance narrative immersion and empathy even further. In conclusion, our review maps the landscape of narrative in serious game for young health. While narratives are powerful tools for engagement, realizing their full potential for lasting behaviors change remains the next level to unlock. Thank you for your attention. Our contact emails are on the screen.